Today we are in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 through 6. It's hard to believe, but we have come to the last chapter of Hebrews. Seems like just yesterday we were talking about Melchizedek, and that was never going to end, right? But I will finish Hebrews the first week of November. It's going to be here that quickly. Afterwards, I intend to work through some small books of the Old Testament, specifically the Minor Prophets, maybe throw in a couple Psalms here and there. We'll work through some more church doctrine, make sure we finish that document. But again, if there's something you'd like me to study or look at, let me know, let Kathy know, she can let me know, and I can start doing that research if there's something you're interested in. But right now, the plan is to start working our way through the Minor Prophets next, then throw in a week or two for Christmas, and as hard as it is to believe, that'll take us to the end of the year. Whew. Crazy. All right. New year, I'll probably start working through the book of Acts. Totally different thing, narrative-driven, lots of practical examples, very much challenging what we do, how we do things, why we do the things that we do, things like that. I'm excited for it. Acts should be really interesting. But today, we begin the end of Hebrews, chapter 13. And chapter 13 is going to feel remarkably different from the rest of the book. Totally different. It's like we're not even reading the same thing. In chapter 12, we started to get practical. We started to get to that point of here's how we should then live. But chapter 13 is intensely practical. Intensely practical. And as believers in Christian, we've talked before that doctrine matters. It matters what we believe. We've talked before that our beliefs are the foundation of our actions, of our lives. And when we have that poor understanding, when we don't read chapters 1 through 11, and we don't understand those well, that works out into our lives. It works into our actions, and we start doing things the wrong way. But at the same time, we can't get so caught up in theology, so caught up in doctrine that we forget to live. We still have to go home and put our beliefs into actions. Just like this audience. This audience was going to hear this letter and then go home and wonder, what am I supposed to do? This is all great, Mr. Author. We don't know who it was. They probably did, maybe not. But what am I supposed to do? How do I live? And that's where he finally ends with, do these things. Looking back, looking up, looking ahead, like we talked about last week. Those are great principles. But our day-to-day life, what do? How do we put this into action? This is the chapter where the rubber meets the road. This is what you do. These are practical examples of day-to-day living by faith. And in today's verses, he's going to give us 5 directions in 6 verses. 5 directions and 6 verses. They're coming at you fast. This is not an exhaustive list. This is not everything that a Christian is called to do. We combine this list with other lists throughout the Bible. We combined it with other principles found in the New Testament. And we start to get a clear idea of how we're supposed to live, what we are supposed to obey, and how we can put our faith into action. What we don't want, what we are truly trying to avoid, is a disconnect between what we say we believe and our actions. There should be no difference between our doctrine, what we say, and our practice, what we do. Some of the worst condemnation in the Bible is reserved for people who do not practice what they preach. They are called hypocrites, and the Bible very clearly teaches that hypocrisy is an affront to God. So we want our practice and our preaching to align. And so my goal today, if we are claiming to be followers of Jesus Christ, then how are we to live? What do we do? What actions can we put into place for our love of Christ to be evident? So let's start by reading all of the verses, 1 through 6, and then we'll go through each command. Let brotherly love continue. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? So the very first command, the very first thing we are told to do, verse 1, let brotherly love continue. We can relate this all the way back to Hebrews 10:25. Do not forsake the assembling of one another. And this is one of the most basic instructions a believer is given. One of the most basic instructions, spend time with other believers. Spend time with other believers. All the way back to Proverbs, as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. We're going to get better with other believers. Now this includes going to church. I've mentioned that a lot up here, but this is beyond Sunday morning as well. To start with church, there is really no excuse for a believer in Christ to not be a part of a local church. There is no excuse for it. I'm not here to debate unique or dramatic situations, 2020, illnesses, debilitating, homeboundness. That's not the point. On the whole, believers who refuse to congregate with other believers, who refuse to remember their Lord through prayer, Bible teaching, and communion, are disobeying God. They are living in disobedience. I've said this before. It doesn't have to be my church. It doesn't have to be here in Araba. It doesn't have to be this building. It doesn't have to be with me. Nothing like that. But believers need to be congregating with other believers. However, this verse is going to extend beyond Sunday morning. Our deepest connections in life, in all of life, need to be with other believers, need to be based on Christ. This ties into 2 Corinthians 6:14 through 18. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness, and what communion has light with darkness? And we have to be very careful, and we need to teach our kids and our grandkids to discern who their friends really are and who their friends should be. Business partnerships, marriages, even simple friendships, hanging out with people, can leave a believer unequally yoked and trying to maintain a standard that is impossible. Non-believers will be allowed to continue in sin. They will be allowed to continue in sin. They are not God's children. They are not expected to obey. As believers, we are dead to sin, and we must avoid sin at all costs. Believers should expect God's discipline when they allow sin into their lives. We cannot connect with them in that deep, meaningful way. Our friendships and commitments should be to fellow believers. Now, as we all know, this is not always possible. Simply not. We can't choose who our coworkers are or who our family are. God sovereignly places those people into our lives. But a good principle to follow: when it is up to you, seek other believers. When it is up to you, seek other believers. The first command we are given is to love each other. Love fellow believers. Again, I go back to other verses. John 13:34 through 35. Jesus says, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another." We need each other. We need each other. We are a family. We will spend eternity together in heaven. And it would be a lot nicer to have a pleasant family reunion in heaven. Like we've all had those awkward family reunions. It'd be much nicer to have a nice one in heaven. Forgive one another. Give a little more grace to one another. Help each other a little bit more. Care for each other a little deeper. Love each other. Love each other. Let brotherly love continue. So the first practice that we need to put into action is to love our fellow believers. Love each other. Take care of one another. Remember, we're a family. And we're not only commanded to love one another for fellowship, we're not only commanded for fellowship, we're designed for fellowship. This is how God built us. In the Garden of Eden, he saw us and said, yeah, it's not right for them to be alone. Man needs someone. All right, this is why God gave Adam and Eve, and they needed each other. We need each other. So let brotherly love continue. The next command is to practice hospitality. Verse 2. Do not forget to entertain strangers, for by so doing some have unwittingly entertained angels. Hospitality. Hospitality. Now we see hospitality mentioned a few times in the New Testament, including Romans 12. Romans 12 is the ultimate guide to Christian living. Romans is quite possibly the greatest theological book ever written. Absolutely brilliant. Right? Hospitality is a big deal in the first century. Very big deal. It's an art that we have kind of lost. At least my generation, we struggle with it a great deal. But Jesus had to travel from town to town. So did Paul. He had to travel from town to town. By all appearances, all of the apostles traveled from town to town and had to find people who were willing to open their doors for them, willing to let them live with them. It was vital for them to find people that they could stay with, that would be hospitable. And in the first century, at this point in time when this letter was written, persecution is starting to spread. It's starting to become a very big deal. So this means that our Jewish Christians, our audience specifically, was probably struggling to open their homes to other people. Because if they allowed someone in, persecution was coming for them. They were afraid of their neighbors. So there's a very practical thing for this audience specifically. But today, we do the same thing. We get far too concerned with what everyone else thinks of us. We're too concerned with appearances. We don't want the neighbors to know how messy our house is. And so we just don't open our house to each other. Now we have this comment about entertaining angels, and that can be taken both literally and figuratively. Lot must have known that the men coming to Sodom were different. He goes to them, he calls them Lord, he bows to them, but did he know they were angels? Probably not. There's no really indication of that. But it was to his benefit that he invited them in. It saved his life. On the other hand, angel could just be, it's another word for messenger in the Greek. So it could be allowing special messengers, God's special messengers into your homes. Like when the people of the Decapolis would open their houses to the apostles and the Gospels. Right? Not literally angels, but God's special messengers that they open the doors to. So don't get too caught up in that. You might entertain angels. That can be both literal and figurative. But the secret with hospitality is that it blesses both sides. Both the guest and the host are blessed. And they're blessed with a deeper fellowship in Jesus. A deeper fellowship. I'm going to even kind of build on that first comment of let brotherly love continue. Jesus says in Matthew 25:40, the king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. When you opened your doors, when you opened your home to them, you did that for Jesus. We are called to be hospitable and expect nothing back in return. In doing so, we know that hospitality is a work for God, and we can trust that He will reward those who practice hospitality. Now, at the same time, once we build hospitality with each other, let brotherly love continue, we're also called to open our house to strangers. To strangers. We start with fellow believers, and then once we have that group, we extend to non-believers. But we have to have a group of believers first. We have to have that core. We have to be together. We have to rely on one another. Again, throwing your lives in with non-believers is scary and dangerous. Rosario Butterfield was a lesbian professor at a college. She was in a committed lesbian relationship, and she just happened to be invited over to church and then into a group of churches, families' homes. And she spent many years with them, talked with them, and eventually, because of their hospitality, because of their kindness, she found Christ, renounced her life, and is now married and a Christian woman. Remarkable speaker and remarkable human being. We combine this hospitality with the other one. We start with each other, but then we do open it up to strangers. We need each other, and we extend that to others. So we have two ways to practice what we preach. We treat fellow believers better, and we open our homes to believers and non-believers in need. Third directive comes in verse 3. Remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. Prisoners. This is another command that harkens back to what our Lord said in Matthew, when I was in prison, you visited me. When we minister to believers in prison, we minister to Christ himself. We minister to Christ. Now, in America, if you think we've lost the art of hospitality, we really struggle with prison ministries. We really struggle here. There are people in this world who sit in prison not because of anything they did, but because they follow Christ. What Kathy read up here is exactly right and very true. The Bible has put people's lives at stake. It has scared them and cost them their lives. Richard Wurmbrand, who spent 14 years in a communist prison, once said, I tremble for Western Christians who don't help their persecuted brethren. In the depth of my heart, I would like to keep the beauty of my own vineyard and not be involved in such a huge fight. I would like so much to be somewhere in quietness and rest, but it is not possible. The quietness and rest for which I long would be an escape from reality and dangerous for my soul. The West sleeps and must be awakened to see the plight of the captive nations. He trembles for us. It is dangerous for our soul to ignore prisons. It will be something to face God and tell him that no, we were never imprisoned. No, we were never beaten. No, we were never tortured. No, we never suffered because of his name. That will be something that no one has ever had to do before. And then it'll be something else entirely to face God and say, no, we didn't suffer, nor did we pray for the people who were suffering. That'll be a scary day. It is indeed dangerous for our souls. Don't forget our brothers and sisters who suffer in other countries. Remember them in your prayers. Remember them. All right, so we can love our fellow brothers and sisters. We can open our lives to help believers in need, and we can minister and pray for those in prison. We have 3 direct items that we can do. The 4th command comes in verse 4. Marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. The home. The home is always a Christian's first priority. This is where God sovereignly placed you. These are the people God has sovereignly given you to care for and to minister to. Now this starts with your marriage. Right? After your relationship with God, your marriage is the second most important relationship in your life. Marriage is not about your happiness, it is about your holiness. We see in Ephesians 5, marriage is a reflection of Christ loving the church. Wives are called to be, as the church, submissive to their husbands. However, husbands do bear the brunt of the responsibility of a marriage. They are called to love their wives as Christ loved the church, that is, self-sacrificially, willing to give up our wants and our desires, willing to give up our lives for her. How you love each other in marriage reveals God to the world, and most importantly, it reflects God's love to your children. So it starts at home, it starts with marriage. One of the men I've recently come to know is Robert Renow. He started a ministry called Visionary Family, and he has an absolutely great quote that we've had to talk about a lot with me trying to be a pastor. Largely in context with speaking to other pastors and leaders, Robert Renow says, our spiritual opportunities cannot surpass our spiritual responsibilities. Our children are our responsibilities. Working for God is our opportunities. When we are given opportunity to serve God, be it through church ministry, be it through missionary work, be it through whatever, our opportunities cannot supplant the people God has given us that we are called to serve. Our spouses and our children must come first. Now, the second part of this verse deals with sexual sin. God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Any sex outside of one man, one woman in marriage is sinful. Be it premarital or extramarital, be it hetero or homo, be it pornographic, be it fantasy, be it literary, which is incredibly popular right now, whatever. One man, one woman, one lifetime. One lifetime. That's all she gets out of me. Then I'm dying and she can wash her own windows. She gets one lifetime. All right, we see this warning repeated. 1 Corinthians 6:18. Flee sexual immorality. Every sin that a man does is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Sexual sin is exceptionally harmful. I think we can see that in our own culture. Premarital sex has become common, it's expected. Extramarital sex has become common. A widespread of acceptance of all sorts of perversions. And we can see where it's taken our culture. We have kids who don't know if they are boys or girls. We have adults who think it's okay to mutilate children. We have put some of the most vulnerable people in harm's way to protect others' feelings, and we have murdered millions of innocents on the altar of convenience. Sexual sin is poison, and there is no place for it in a believer's life. There's 4. We can love our fellow believers. We open our homes to those in need. We remember those who are suffering, and we keep Jesus in our homes. The 5th command is the longest, with 2 verses. It's also the broadest in application, verses 5 and 6. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. For he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me? Material things, covetousness. This is a warning against covetousness. The 10th commandment of Exodus 20. To covet means to want what you don't have. You want more. And when we covet, we do 2 things against God. We are telling him that we know better than him, that we can't trust him with our lives because we know better. Second, we're telling God that his son wasn't enough. That despite his great sacrifice, we need more. Now, covetousness is hard for us, incredibly difficult for us. We need to be careful with ideas because we can certainly swing too far one way or the other. As a nation, as a people, we naturally live richer lives than even the Caesar of Rome would have lived. We are better off than even the biggest guy there. He could not have imagined the wealth at our fingertips. We have clean running water. I go to my kitchen, turn on a tap, and clean running water that I can just drink. We have machines that clean for us. I can just load up my dishwasher, run a vacuum, clean my entire house in moments. We have cars that can take us farther in a day than most people would have traveled in their entire lives. And many of us have 2 or 3 of them. We have phones. We can talk to anyone in the world at any time, just because we want to. We have air conditioners and furnaces. Do we understand that we can be hot or cold whenever we want to? The wealth that we have just naturally is beyond anything that this world has ever seen. We are wealthy beyond measure, even compared to just 60 years ago. We are so vastly wealthy as a nation, and it's a wonderful, amazing thing. Realize it's a good thing. It is a good thing. These are all blessings from God. It is honorable to work. When we work for the Lord. That work comes with a paycheck, and there's nothing wrong with buying some new toy with that hard-earned paycheck. That's okay. I myself love board games. I literally buy toys. I have quite a collection of board games. Hundreds of them. I love it. I enjoy buying new games. I enjoy playing the games I have. My father-in-law loves wood. He has a huge, amazing collection of wood. Sometimes he works with it. I think he just likes to stare at his wood. That's okay. We all have hobbies. We all have stuff that we just enjoy. My question is going to be, how do we treat these things? How do we treat these new toys? Do we love them more than we love God? For all the games I've purchased, I've never missed church because a game was more important. I know that God is more important. Does all that work that you put into it, does it consist of only the next new thing? Do you stop paying your bills? Do you stop taking care of your responsibilities? Do you stop doing the things you know you need to do? Of all the games I've purchased, we've made sure we have time to play the ones that we have. We also make sure we still have time and opportunity to be charitable, to give things away as we can. Do you use these new items selfishly or in service to God? Are you the only one allowed to use this new toy, this new tool, this new car? It's only you and everyone else has to back off? Do you use it to further your ministry? My games are for my wife and I to grow closer to each other. My games are for a way the kids to spend time with their parents. My games, I've been able to create a deeper fellowship with other believers as we've invited them into our homes and have something to do. It's not awkward, goofy Nick standing there trying to make weird conversation. We are not called to live as isolated hermits, eschewing all worldly goods either. So we can definitely swing too far one way or the other with this. We are not called to eschew everything, nor are we called to collect more and more junk until it's replaced God in our hearts. And that's the issue. This is a matter of the heart. Is your heart with your material goods, or is it with God? If God took all of your stuff away from you tomorrow, today, when you left here, could you still bless the name of the Lord? This is Job. This is Job. The hard truth of materialism that many Christians don't want to hear, that we like to push away and ignore. The hard truth is, it is harder to be a good Christian when you are comfortable. It is harder to be a good Christian when you are comfortable. Comfort brings you closer to the world. Suffering brings you closer to God. This is why Richard Wurmbrand, 14 years in a communist prison, tortured, beaten, starved, he can feel sorry for us. He trembles for us. Because he suffered, he got closer to God. One of my favorite anecdotes, I'm sure I've told it before, but it's always worth repeating. A missionary and a pastor return from a mission trip. They pull up to a church leader's house ready to share their triumphs and are shocked. They can see the big screen TV, the 3-car garage, a boat in the street. They can see the 3-story house, the green yard with the automatic lawnmower. They can see the shopping bags on the counter, the kitchen bursting with all sorts of food. They can see shoes and coat racks, the AC running full blast, and they see all this stuff. And the missionary turns to the pastor and asks, what good news do we have for this person? When we have everything we want and need here on this earth, we tend to forget how much better heaven is going to be. It is harder to be a good Christian when we are comfortable with the things of this world. So these are the first 5 directives of Hebrews 13. They're all about how we interact with each other. They're about spiritual fellowship. Love your fellow believers. Care for them a little bit more. Practice hospitality. Open your homes to each other and to others. Remember those who are in prison. Remember those who are suffering. Keep them in your prayers. Honor your marriage. Honor your marriage. Your home comes first. And be content with what you have. If, as a believer in Christ, if, as this audience still did not know, after the first 11 chapters, how we are called to live, start here. Start here. What do? Follow these 5 practical applications of putting our doctrine into action. And what these items help reveal is our heart. To know that Christ is sufficient. Whether we are locked in a cell with no new toys to play with, whether we have no fellow believers to keep us company, Even if we are given nothing and have nothing, we can